My phone rang at 11:07 p.m. and the sound cut through the hotel room like a shout. The room had been dark and still. My wife had already fallen asleep with the TV off. I had been lying there staring at the ceiling, hearing my father's funeral in my head on repeat, trying to make my breathing slow down. When I saw my daughter's name on the screen, my stomach tightened. I answered fast, whispering at first because it was late. I did not even get to say her name. I heard her crying hard, not quiet tears, the kind that made the throat catch and the words break. Behind her, I heard other voices, two girls angry and close to the phone. It sounded like an argument that had already been going on for a long time. "Dad," she said, and then she gasped like she could not get air. They were not letting her finish. I sat up and swung my feet to the floor. My heart went from heavy to sharp. I said, "What happened? Where are you?" But my words did not matter. I heard my stepdaughter, the older one, loud and annoyed, like she wanted the call to end. I heard the younger one too, not as loud, but close enough to make it feel like they were both leaning over my daughter. I heard my daughter say, "Please, I just want to sleep. I do not want to fight." And then she made a sound like she tried not to sob again. I turned the bedside lamp on with my elbow. The yellow light made everything look sick. My wife stirred and blinked at me, confused, like the room had shifted. I put my hand over the phone and said, "It is her. Something is wrong." When I brought the phone back, my daughter sounded smaller. She said, "They said I have to sleep on the floor." I did not understand at first. The words did not fit in my head, sleep on the floor. It was a hotel. We had booked a room for the three girls, a room with beds. I could picture the hallway, the carpet, the quiet doors. My brain tried to correct what I heard, like she must have meant the couch, or an extra bed, or some small complaint that felt big because everyone was tired. I said, "What do you mean, on the floor?" She sniffed and tried to explain. She said there were two beds. She said her stepsisters took one bed and told her the other bed was theirs too. She said she could take a blanket and sleep on the carpet, like it was normal, like she was a guest who should be grateful for a corner. In the background, one of them said, "Stop being dramatic. It is one night." My daughter made a quiet choking sound like those words had landed on her chest. I heard her say, "I am not being dramatic. I am tired. My back hurts. I am not sleeping on the floor." I gripped the phone so tight my hand hurt. All day I had kept myself together. I had listened to people talk about my father in polite voices. I had stood near a casket and acted like I was not breaking inside. I had gotten through the flight and the hotel check-in and the forced family small talk. I had done all of it because I thought at least the night would be quiet. Now my 16-year-old was crying at 11 at night in a room I paid for, being told she did not deserve a bed. I looked at my wife. She was fully awake now, sitting up, hair messy, eyes narrowed at the sound of my daughter's crying. Her face showed irritation before it showed concern, like she was already calculating how much trouble this would be. I said into the phone, "Put me on speaker." There was a pause. Then the sound changed, wider, more open. My daughter's breathing was loud and uneven. I heard movement, like someone shifting on a mattress. I heard the older stepdaughter say, "Hello." I said, "Why is she being told to sleep on the floor?" There was another pause, and in that silence I heard the hotel itself. Air conditioning. A muffled door closing far away. Everything else asleep while my child was begging for a place to lie down. The older one answered, "She is being difficult." I said, "That did not answer my question." My daughter whispered, "Dad, please." The older one said, "We are older. We need the bed." I felt heat rise behind my eyes. I said, "There are two beds. Explain to me why she cannot sleep in a bed." The younger one finally spoke, and her voice was flat, like she had rehearsed it in her head. She said, "It is just easier this way." "Easier for who?" I asked. No one answered. My daughter cried again, softer now, like she was trying to disappear. The sound made something in my chest turn cold. It was not just about a bed. It was the way they spoke around her, over her, like she was not family, like she was an item that could be moved out of the way. My wife leaned closer, listening, and I saw the tension in her jaw. I knew what she would say before she said it. Keep it calm. Do not make a scene. We were here for your father. We were supposed to be one family. But my daughter's voice cracked again, and I stopped thinking about calm. I stopped thinking about money. I stopped thinking about keeping the peace with people who could hear a 16-year-old crying and still argue for her to sleep on the carpet. I stood up, still holding the phone. I said, "Stay where you are. Do not hang up. I am coming." I walked to the door barefoot, the carpet rough under my feet, and for a moment I hesitated with my hand on the handle. The hallway outside was quiet. The girls' room was only a short walk away, but my body felt heavy, like I was walking into something I could not take back. I opened the door and stepped into the dim corridor, and I started toward their room without knowing what I was about to see. The walk down the hallway brought everything back that I had tried to hold away all day. 2 weeks earlier, my father had died, and I still did not have a clean place in my mind for that fact. It sat there like a weight that kept shifting. The funeral had been that morning. People had hugged me and said the same soft sentences, and I had nodded like a machine. By the time we got back to the hotel, I felt scraped out. I only wanted everyone to sleep so the next day could come and we could go home. That trip had never been planned for comfort. It had been planned for survival. We had flown into my hometown with tight connections and tired eyes. My wife had handled the reservations because I had been buried in phone calls, paperwork, and family logistics. I had not cared where we stayed as long as it was clean and close. I had been the one who had to stand in front of my relatives and keep my face steady. I had been the one who had to visit places that still smelled like my father. The people traveling were my wife, my daughter, and my 2 stepdaughters. My daughter was 16. My stepdaughters were 19 and 17. In the airport, they had looked like a normal group, 3 teenagers glued to their phones, acting bored, acting above it all. But I had watched their spacing without meaning to. The 2 older girls moved together like a pair. My daughter walked a half step behind. No one said anything cruel in front of me, but the quiet gaps told their own story. My daughter had lost her biological mother when she was little. That absence had shaped her in ways she did not talk about much. I knew she carried it like a secret bruise. She tried hard to fit into my new family. She did not ask for special treatment. She did not demand attention. Sometimes I worried that she acted too careful, like she believed she had to earn her place. I had married my wife believing we could blend our lives without anyone getting pushed out. She loved her daughters fiercely. I respected that. I loved my daughter fiercely too, and I believed there was room for all of it if we stayed fair and honest. But grief did strange things. It made people smaller. It made small irritations feel like threats. It made me watch everything with sharper eyes. The hotel choice had been simple on paper. We booked 2 rooms, 1 room for me and my wife, 1 room for the 3 girls. My wife had framed it as practical. She said it saved money. She also said it would keep the peace because the girls could handle their own space without adults hovering. I did not argue. I had been too tired to argue about anything that was not directly connected to the funeral. I remembered standing at the front desk while the clerk slid plastic key cards across the counter. The lobby smelled like cheap air freshener and coffee. It was bright in the wrong way, like it never fully became night. My wife had checked the confirmation on her phone, then looked up and smiled like she had solved a problem. 2 rooms. Done. There was a detail I did not focus on at the time. The girls' room had 2 beds, not 3. I saw it when we dropped the bags off and my mind registered it and moved on. 2 beds could still mean 3 people sleeping. Teenagers did that at sleepovers all the time. One could take the extra pillows. Someone could sleep across the bottom. It was not ideal, but it was one night. That was what I told myself. My wife told me she expected them to share, all 3. She said they were sisters now, and sisters figured it out. She said the room was only for sleeping anyway. She said the funeral trip was expensive, and we did not need a 3rd room for no reason. The way she said it made it sound like I would be wasteful to even ask. After the funeral, everyone moved through the evening like they were underwater. My stepdaughters barely spoke to me. They spoke to their mother in short bursts, then went quiet. My daughter stayed close to me when we were in public, but she kept her face neutral, like she did not want to be seen needing anything. I watched her hands when she thought no one noticed. She picked at her nails until the skin around them looked sore. When we finally got back to the hotel for the night, the hallway felt too long. The carpet swallowed footsteps. Doors shut softly and stayed shut. We split up outside our rooms. My wife and I went into ours. The girls went into theirs. It should have ended there, a tired, clean ending to a day that had taken everything out of me. I remembered telling my daughter good night as she walked toward the other door. She looked over her shoulder at me for a second, like she wanted to say something else. Then she did not. She just nodded and went inside with the other two. I lay down later with my eyes open, listening to the building settle and the air unit click on and off. I told myself the plan was fine. 2 rooms, a shared bed, 3 teens, 1 hard day behind us, 1 day left, then home. It sounded simple when I said it in my head. But simple plans broke in the dark. And in the room next to ours, rules had started forming that no one had told me about yet. I had lived inside a blended family long enough to know that nothing stayed small for long. A look at the dinner table could turn into a story about respect. A change of plans could turn into a story about loyalty. People did not always say what they meant, but they kept score. And when I tried to be fair, it sometimes made things worse, because everyone had a different idea of what fair looked like. I had known my stepdaughters since they were kids. I had been there for school events, birthdays, and long car rides where they fought and then made up before we got home. I was not a stranger in their lives. I did not expect them to call me dad, and they never did, but I believed we had a working bond. I treated them like my own in the ways I could. I paid for trips, helped with rides, and showed up when they needed a ride or a signature or a calm adult in the room. My wife stayed home with them when they were younger, and she ran the day-to-day parts of their lives. She knew their moods and their habits. She also carried a protective instinct that could turn sharp fast. If she sensed I was choosing my daughter over her girls, even in a small way, she reacted like it was a threat to her family. She did not always say it directly, but the message came through in how quickly she defended them, and how often she asked me to be the one to compromise. Money had been a quiet pressure point for us too. We had agreements, we shared costs, we talked about budgets, but my wife watched spending closely, especially when it involved the kids. If I bought something for my daughter, she noticed. If I did not buy the exact same thing for her girls, she noticed that too. She called it fairness. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it felt like a test I could never fully pass. My daughter did not compete. That was part of the problem. She did not demand equal attention. She did not argue for her space. She slid to the edge and hoped no one would push her further. When my stepdaughters talked over her, she waited. When they chose the movie, she shrugged. When they made jokes she did not understand, she smiled anyway. She wanted to belong more than she wanted to be right. I saw that pattern in small moments during the trip. In the airport, my stepdaughters walked together, shoulders close, sharing earbuds. My daughter stayed near them but not with them. On the shuttle, my daughter ended up on the single seat while the other two took the bench. Nobody ordered it out loud. It just happened, like the world arranged itself around who mattered most. I tried to correct those things gently when I noticed. I asked my daughter questions. I tried to include her. I told her she could speak up. But grief had taken the extra patience I usually had. My father's death had made my thoughts feel slow, like I was moving through thick water. I was not watching everything as closely as I should have been. I assumed basic kindness would hold when I was not looking. My wife believed in keeping things smooth. She hated open conflict. She would rather everyone pretend to be fine than force a hard conversation. I understood why. Blended families could feel fragile. One argument could make someone say, "See, this is why it never works." So she aimed for quiet. She aimed for normal. She aimed for the cheapest plan that also looked like unity. That was why she booked 2 rooms. She said it like it was the obvious choice. Adults in one room, girls in the other. She said the girls were old enough to handle it. She said if we separated them, it would look like we did not trust them and it would cause drama. She said we did not need to waste money when the whole trip had already cost more than we expected. I did not fight her on it because I did not want another battle on top of burying my father. I also did not want to be the man who always insisted his daughter needed special treatment. I knew that story. I knew how it would sound in my wife's mouth later, even if she did not mean it cruelly. You always jump when she calls. You always take her side. You do not trust my girls. So I chose the path that looked neutral. I told myself 3 teenagers could share 2 beds for one night. I told myself the older girls would be decent. I told myself my daughter would be okay because she had always been okay before. But the truth was, my stepdaughters had a bond that did not include her. They shared a mother, a past, and an unspoken language. My daughter had only me, and she did not like using that fact like a weapon. She had learned that asking for help could make people angry. She had learned that even a small request could be framed as causing trouble. That was what made the phone call later feel so heavy. My daughter did not call me to complain about a pillow or a blanket. She did not call me because she wanted attention. She called me crying because something had crossed a line bad enough that she could not solve it quietly. As I moved down that hallway toward the girl's door, I realized this was exactly what blended families did in moments like this. They turned a simple problem into a loyalty test. And somewhere behind that closed door, my daughter had learned the rule of the room the hard way. I reached the door and raised my hand to knock, already hearing my daughter's uneven breathing through the phone, and I understood that whatever I found on the other side was going to change the way we traveled together from that night on. When I knocked, the sound felt too loud for that quiet hallway. My daughter stayed on the phone, and I heard her inhale like she had been holding her breath for a long time. No one answered right away. There was a pause, then a low shuffle, like feet on carpet and fabric dragging across a bed. The door opened only halfway. The older stepdaughter stood there with her arms crossed, blocking most of the view. Her face looked calm, almost bored, like I had interrupted something unimportant. The light from the room hit my eyes, and for a second I could not see past her. I said, "Open the door." She did, slow, still looking at me like I was the problem. I stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was how warm the room felt, like 3 bodies and a closed door had made the air thick. The second thing I noticed was the bed situation. There were 2 beds in the room, but only one of them looked like a bed someone planned to sleep in. The other bed had suitcases and clothes spread across it like a wall. A backpack, a makeup bag, a pile of jackets. It was not an accident. It looked arranged. It looked claimed. On the bed they had cleared, the 2 stepdaughters sat near the middle like they owned the space. The younger one kept her eyes down. The older one watched me. My daughter stood near the bathroom door with her phone in her hand and her shoulders pulled in tight. Her cheeks were wet. Her hair was messy like she had been wiping her face with her sleeve. She looked at me like she felt ashamed for calling. The carpet near her feet had a blanket on it, not neatly folded, just tossed there like an answer to a question no one had asked out loud. A thin hotel blanket and one flat pillow. The pillow was already on the floor like someone had decided that was where her head belonged. I looked from the blanket to my daughter, and my stomach turned. I said, "Is this what you meant?" She nodded once quick, like she wanted it over. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. She swallowed and said, "They said I should sleep there." The older stepdaughter let out a short breath through her nose, like my daughter was being silly. She said, "We did not say it like that." I took a step deeper into the room and kept my voice low because the walls were thin and it was late, but I could not hide the edge in it. I said, "Then how did you say it?" The older one shrugged. She pointed with her chin at the floor like it was obvious. She said, "There is not enough room." I stared at the bed. It was a queen bed, wide enough that 3 teenagers could fit if they wanted to. It would not be comfortable. It would be crowded. But it was still a bed. And the other bed was right there, being used like storage. I said, "There is another bed." The younger one finally looked up. Her eyes flicked to the bed covered in bags, then away. She did not speak. That silence told me more than words did. It said the decision had already been made, and it had not included my daughter as equal. My daughter wiped her face hard and said, "I told them we could move the bags. I told them I could sleep on the edge. I said I did not care. I just did not want the floor, and they said no." When she said no, her voice shook. Not angry, embarrassed, like she could not believe she had to argue for a bed in a hotel room that was supposed to be hers too. I looked at the blanket again. The carpet was clean, but it was still a hotel floor. People walked on it with shoes. Housekeeping rolled carts over it. It was not a place for a 16-year-old to sleep while her stepsisters took the bed and filled the other bed with luggage. The older stepdaughter said, "It is one night. She could deal with it." My daughter flinched at that like she expected me to agree. She kept her eyes on the ground. That hurt to see. It meant she had learned not to expect protection unless she begged for it. I asked my daughter, "Did you do something to them? Did you say something? Did something happen earlier?" She shook her head fast. She said, "No, I just wanted to sleep. They just started saying it like it was decided already." I turned back to my stepdaughters. Their faces stayed set. No guilt, no confusion, no sign that this had been a mistake. The older one sat tall, comfortable. The younger one stayed quiet, letting her sister carry it. In that moment, I understood the real issue. It was not about comfort. It was not about space. It was about status. They had taken the room and they had placed my daughter where they believed she belonged. I felt my grief twist into something sharper. I had been tired. I had been distracted. I had trusted them to behave like family when I was not watching. And in one night, in one closed room, they had shown my daughter she was the extra person. I took a breath and kept my voice steady. I said, "I was going to ask one simple question, and I wanted a real answer." I looked the older stepdaughter in the eye, then the younger one. I said, "Why did you decide she should sleep on the floor?" They both stared at me like I had asked a trick question. The older one shifted her weight on the bed and said, "Because it made sense." Like that ended it, like there was nothing else to explain. I kept my voice low, but I felt it tighten. I said it did not make sense. There were 2 beds. One was being used for bags. She was 16. You were telling her to sleep on the floor. Why? The younger one looked at her sister first, like she needed permission to speak. Then she said, "We were already settled." Already settled. That was her reason. Like my daughter was a late arrival to a room she had been assigned hours earlier. My daughter stood near the bathroom door, holding her phone with both hands. Her shoulders stayed raised, tense, like she expected the answer to hurt. She did not interrupt. She just watched me, waiting for an adult to make this real. I pointed at the second bed. I said, "Move the bags. She could take that bed." Problem solved. The older stepdaughter's face tightened. Not guilty, defensive. She said that was our stuff. There was nowhere else to put it. I looked around the room. There was open floor space. There was a chair. There was the closet. There were options everywhere. Her words felt like a wall built from nothing. I said, "You could have put it on the floor. You were okay putting a person on the floor." The older one gave a small shrug. She did not answer that. She just looked away like she was bored of being questioned. I felt my grief pushing at the edges of my control. I had spent the whole day holding myself together for strangers and family members who wanted me calm. Now I was standing in a hotel room staring at a blanket on the carpet like it was an insult written out loud. I tried again, slower. I said, "Did she say something to you? Did she offend you? Did something happen on the trip?" Give me something real." My daughter shook her head again before they could answer, like she was terrified they would make something up. Her eyes were red. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the bathroom and lock the door. The younger stepdaughter finally said, "Nothing happened." I said, "Then why were you doing this?" The older one exhaled hard and said she could have just gotten over it. It was one night. It was not a big deal. That sentence landed in the room and stayed there. Not a big deal. It told me they understood exactly what they were doing. They were making it normal. They were training my daughter to accept being the extra person. I said it was a big deal because she was crying and calling me at 11 at night. The older one's eyes flicked to my daughter, then back to me. She said she always overreacted. My daughter flinched at that, like she had heard it before. She tightened her grip on the phone until her knuckles went pale. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. It was not only anger, it was clarity. I had been trying to build a home where everyone belonged. In this room, in this moment, my daughter had not belonged. And the worst part was the way they spoke, like her pain was a personality flaw. I said, "Look at me. I asked you for a reason, a real reason, not comfort, not settled, not one night. Tell me why she was the one you chose to put on the floor." The older stepdaughter met my eyes and smiled a little thin and sharp. She said, "Because we were not going to squeeze. We deserved to sleep too." I stared at her. The word deserved hit me the hardest. It carried the whole message. They deserved the bed. My daughter did not. I looked at the younger one. I said, "Do you agree with this?" She hesitated. She swallowed. Then she nodded once, small, like she wanted it to be invisible. She did not say the words, but she did not stop it either. My daughter made a quiet sound in her throat, like she had been punched without being touched. Her eyes fixed on the carpet and the blanket again. She looked like she was already preparing herself to give in, because fighting had not worked and explaining had not worked and asking nicely had not worked. That was when I knew the non-answer was the answer. They could not explain it because it was not logical. It was a choice. And if I let it happen, even for one night, I would be telling my daughter the same thing they were telling her. I took a breath and kept my voice steady, even though my hands had started to shake. I said, "Okay." Then here was what was going to happen next. And as I said it, I felt the rest of the trip shifting under my feet, like a floor that had suddenly stopped being solid. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam anything. I just felt something inside me click into place, the way it did when danger showed up and there was no time to debate it. All day, I had been swallowing grief like it was food I could not chew. I had been polite when I wanted to scream. I had nodded when I wanted to fall apart. I had watched my father lowered into the ground and told myself I would handle my feelings later, when everyone else was not watching. But standing there in that hotel room, looking at my daughter and the blanket on the carpet, I realized something simple. If I let this happen, I would be teaching her that her comfort and dignity were optional. I would be telling her that keeping the peace mattered more than how she was treated. I had seen too much of that in my life. People called it compromise. They called it family harmony. But it always seemed to land on the same person. The one who was quiet. The one who did not want trouble. The one who had already learned to accept less. My daughter's eyes stayed down. Her face looked hot and wet. She looked like she was waiting for me to tell her to stop crying and just go to sleep on the floor. I stepped closer to her so she did not have to face them alone, and I said, "Get your things. Right now." She looked up fast, confused. She said, "What?" I said it again, slower. "Get your things, your bag, your phone charger, anything you needed for tonight and tomorrow morning. We were leaving this room." The older stepdaughter sat up straighter. Her calm finally cracked into alarm. She said, "Where was she going?" I did not answer her first. I looked at my daughter and nodded once, like I was giving her permission to move. She hesitated, then she reached for her backpack like she did not trust it to be real. Her hands shook as she pulled a charger from the wall. The younger stepdaughter stared at me like I had broken an unspoken rule. She said, "Dad, what was this?" That word hit wrong. Dad. It was not affection. It was leverage. It was her trying to pull me back into the role where I protected everyone equally, even when someone was being pushed down. I said she was not sleeping on the floor, not here. The older one said, "We did not tell her she had to. We just said there was not space." I looked at the bed covered in luggage and then at her. I said, "You made the space for bags. You did not make space for her." The older one opened her mouth, then closed it. She still did not give me a reason. She only looked offended, like I had embarrassed her. My daughter stood by the door now with her backpack over one shoulder, still crying but quieter. The crying had changed. It was not only hurt anymore. It was relief, mixed with fear, like she expected the relief to be taken away at any second. I said, "Do you have everything?" She nodded. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and whispered, "I am sorry." That made my stomach twist. I shook my head. I said, "You did nothing wrong." The older stepdaughter scoffed under her breath, like that sentence itself was unfair. I did not argue with them more. I knew how these conversations went. The longer you stayed, the more they tried to reshape the story. The more they pushed you to negotiate. I was not going to negotiate my daughter sleeping on the floor so two teenagers could have extra space. I opened the door and guided my daughter out into the hallway. The carpet felt cooler out there. The air smelled clean compared to the warm, thick room. The door shut behind us, and the sound was soft but final. We walked toward the elevator. My daughter kept close to me like she was afraid her stepsisters would come after her. She kept looking back over her shoulder. She did not speak. Her breathing was still uneven. In my head, I started doing the math immediately. Another room meant more money, another deposit, another charge on the card. It meant my wife would look at me like I had thrown cash into the air for no reason. But I also did another kind of math. What was the cost of one night on the floor, not on a bill, inside my daughter? The cost of knowing her father saw it and still let it happen. That number was too high. I could not pay it. At the elevator, I pressed the button and waited. The hallway stayed silent except for the machine hum of the building. My daughter wiped her face again and tried to control herself, like she was embarrassed to be seen. I said, "Look at me." She looked up. I said, "You were not being dramatic. You were not wrong for calling me. If anyone made you feel like you were too much for needing a bed, that was their problem, not yours." Her eyes filled again, but she nodded. The elevator arrived with a soft ding. We got inside. I watched the doors close, and in that closing gap I saw the older stepdaughter step into the hallway outside their room. She watched us go like she could not decide if she was angry or shocked. On the ground floor, we walked to the front desk. The lobby lights were too bright for midnight. The clerk looked up with that tired, polite face people had when they wanted the night to stay quiet. I said I needed a room, one room just for my daughter. The clerk blinked, then nodded and started typing. I handed over my card without looking at my daughter because I did not want her to see me hesitate, even for half a second. The clerk quoted the price. It was not cheap. I felt it hit my chest anyway. I signed. I took the key card. I did not ask my daughter if it was okay. I did not ask if she wanted to go back and try to work it out. I had already decided that her dignity was not something we bargained with. We rode the elevator up to her new floor. The hallway there looked the same, but it felt different because it belonged to no one else. When we reached the door, I held the key card steady and let her open it. Inside, the room was quiet and untouched. 2 clean beds, crisp sheets, no luggage walls, no blanket on the floor waiting like an insult. My daughter stood in the doorway like she did not know what to do with safety. I said, "This was yours tonight. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone. If you needed me, you called me right away." She whispered, "Okay." I turned to leave, and the grief came back in a wave, heavy and hot behind my eyes. Not only for my father, for the fact that the people I had brought into my daughter's life had just shown me what they were capable of when no one watched. As I pulled the door almost closed, I heard my phone vibrate again in my pocket. I did not have to check the screen to know who it was going to be. The next fight was not going to be with the girls. It was going to be with my wife. On the walk back to my room, I could already hear my wife's argument in my head, like it had been waiting behind the door the whole time. Not because she was cruel, because she was wired to stop chaos before it spread, and this trip had been nothing but chaos since the phone call telling me my father was gone. She had booked the hotel the way she always did things. Efficient, controlled, cheapest option that still looked decent. She had told me straight out that the funeral trip was already draining us. Flights, rental car, meals, last-minute changes. She had said we did not need to spend extra money just because the girls would be uncomfortable for one night. She had treated it like a small sacrifice that proved we were one family. In her mind, putting the three girls together had been a peace move. If the teens were separate, she assumed they would complain. If one got a private room, she assumed the others would feel punished or singled out. She had wanted them to bond without adults watching, like sharing a room could force them into being closer. She did not say it in those words, but I knew her. She believed enough togetherness could smooth rough edges. She also feared the word favoritism the way some people feared fire. It had been the shadow in our marriage since the day our families merged. Even when I tried to be fair, she watched for signs. Not because she wanted to catch me being wrong, but because she worried about her daughters being pushed aside in a house that used to belong to just them. And if she felt that risk, she protected them fast. I had watched her do it in small ways. If I spent extra time helping my daughter with something, my wife asked later if the other girls needed the same help. If I offered my daughter a choice first, my wife noticed who I looked at and when. Sometimes she was right. Sometimes I did not even realize I had done it. But the point was, she saw everything through that lens. And grief made that lens tighter. My wife had lost people too, not my father, but she still carried her own fears about losing control. She hated scenes. She hated raised voices. She hated anything that might spill out in public and make us look broken. A funeral was the worst place for her to feel that. Everyone was already raw. Everyone was already watching us. She wanted to get through it without extra damage. That was why she had wanted the simplest plan. 2 rooms, adults in one, girls in the other, no complicated switching, no last-minute upgrades, no awkward explanations to the front desk, no perception that we could not handle our own kids. She had expected all 3 girls to share beds like normal teenagers did, and she had expected the night to pass without a problem. I believed her on that one part. I did not think she had planned for my daughter to end up on the floor. My wife could be stubborn, but she was not the kind of person who would calmly agree that a child should sleep on hotel carpet while 2 others took a bed. If she had known that was happening, she would have stepped in. The problem was what she would have called stepping in. In her world, stepping in meant smoothing it over, telling my daughter to just give them space, telling everyone to stop being dramatic, telling me not to make it worse. She would have treated it like a temporary discomfort, not a message. She would have focused on the cost of a new room, not the cost of letting my daughter be humiliated. And I also knew something else. My wife's loyalty ran first through her daughters. She loved my daughter, but she did not feel my daughter in her bones the way I did. If her girls came to her upset and said I had overreacted, she would hear their hurt louder than my daughter's tears. She would see my choice as a rejection of them, even if I did not mean it that way. That was the trap. To me, it had been a simple line, no floor, no debate. To her, my action would look like me declaring sides. It would look like me giving my daughter a private room and leaving her girls behind like they were the problem. And they were the problem, at least in that moment. But I could already predict how my wife would hear that. She would hear me saying her daughters were bad. She would hear me saying she had raised them wrong. She would hear me saying my daughter mattered more. I did not want any of that. I wanted one basic rule: nobody treated my kid like she was less. By the time I reached our door, my phone had buzzed again, and I did not need to read the message to know the source. The stepdaughters would have gone straight to their mother. They would not have told her the whole picture either. They would have said I had pulled my daughter out, that I had booked her a private room, that I had made a scene, that I had acted like they were monsters. And my wife would have felt blindsided. She would have felt embarrassed. She would have felt like I had made a decision without her in front of her kids, making her look powerless. She would have felt the money leave our account in real time, and to her, that would have been proof I did not respect the plan. One choice could look like protection to one person and favoritism to another. That was the truth of it, and I was about to walk into the version of the story where I was the villain. I put my hand on the key card and paused, listening. No sound came from inside, but I knew she was awake. She would have been sitting up in bed, phone in hand, reading whatever her daughters had sent and building her response like a shield. I opened the door and stepped into our room. My wife was upright, just like I expected, her face tight and alert in the glow of her screen. She did not ask if my daughter was okay. She said, "Why did you book another room? Do you know how much that cost?" My wife sat up in bed with her phone in her hand, the screen light cutting hard lines across her face. She looked past me like she expected her daughters to walk in behind me at any second. She said, "Why did you book another room? Do you know how much that cost?" I closed the door carefully, because it was late and there were people sleeping on both sides of us. My hands still shook from holding myself back in the other room. I said my daughter was crying. They were telling her to sleep on the floor. My wife blinked like she had not heard me right. Then her mouth tightened. She said, "On the floor, for one night. You could have handled that without spending more money." It was the speed of it that hit me. Not even a pause to ask if my daughter was okay. Not even a moment to be shocked. She went straight to money, like it was the only thing that mattered. I said no. I could not have handled it by telling her to accept it. My wife sat up higher and pulled the blanket around her shoulders. She said, "You were always like this. You took her side before you even talked to me." I felt something ugly move in my chest. Grief and anger mixed together until I could not tell them apart. I said, "I talked to your daughters. I asked them why. They did not have a reason. They just said they deserved the bed and she could get over it." My wife's eyes flicked down to her phone. I saw her thumb move. She was reading messages while I was speaking to her, like my words were background noise. She said, "They told me you stormed in there and acted like they were bullies. They said you embarrassed them." I stared at her. The room felt smaller with every sentence. I said, "I asked a question. Why was my 16-year-old the only one expected to sleep on hotel carpet? That was not embarrassing. That was reality." My wife exhaled and shook her head slowly, like she was calming herself down for my sake. She said, "You did not need to make it into a big thing. You could have told them to share the bed. You could have told your daughter to deal with it for one night. We were here for a funeral. We did not need drama." The word drama cut deeper than I expected. Like my daughter's tears were an inconvenience, not a warning. I said, "The drama started when they put a blanket on the floor for her like she was a dog." My wife's face changed at that, not sympathy, anger. She said, "Do not talk about my girls like that." I took a step closer to the bed, keeping my voice low so it did not carry into the hallway. I said, "Then do not talk about my daughter like she should accept being treated like that." My wife's eyes widened. She said, "There it was, my daughter, your daughter. You always separated them." I felt my jaw tighten. I wanted to remind her that my father had just been buried, that I did not have space for this. But I also knew that if I let her frame this as a simple comfort issue, we would never reach the real problem. I said they separated her first. In that room, they made it clear she was not equal. I was not going to reward that. My wife sat forward and planted her feet on the floor. Her voice got sharper. She said, "Reward. You think you were not rewarding her by giving her her own room. You think my girls did not see that and feel rejected." I said, "Rejected. They were the ones who rejected her." My wife lifted her phone slightly, like it was evidence. She said they were upset. They were crying too. They said you walked her out like she was the only one who mattered. I rubbed my face with my hand, trying to slow down my breathing. My father's funeral clothes still smelled like the day, like old flowers and church air. Everything in me felt dry and tired. I said they had 2 beds. They chose to fill one with luggage and put her on the floor. If they felt upset, they could think about why. My wife's voice turned cold. She said, "You always did this. You acted like their feelings were nothing. You acted like my girls were the problem in every conflict." I stared at her, stunned by how quickly she built a story where her daughters were victims. I said, "Your girls were 19 and 17. They were not toddlers. They knew exactly what they were doing. And you were sitting here telling me my daughter should have endured it." My wife pointed her finger toward the door, like my daughter's room was somewhere behind it. She said, "Yes, endured it, one night, because it was not worth wasting money and creating a bigger issue. You were supposed to keep the peace." I felt my voice go flat. I said, "Keeping the peace was not my job if it meant sacrificing her dignity." My wife shook her head again, faster now. She said, "Dignity. You made it sound so serious. It was a hotel, it was late, people got cranky. You overreacted. You always overreacted when it was her." There it was, the sentence I had been waiting for. I said, "Say it clearly." My wife's eyes held mine. She did not look away. She said, "You played favorites." The room went silent after that. Even the air conditioner sounded louder. I felt my stomach drop, not because the accusation surprised me, but because it told me she had already chosen her side. I said, "If protecting my child from sleeping on the floor was favoritism, then fine. Call it that." My wife's mouth opened like she was about to fire back. Then she stopped and looked down at her phone again as it buzzed. I watched her read another message, and I knew the girls were feeding her their version in real time, shaping her anger, feeding the fire. She looked up and said they were going to call the front desk. They were going to switch things around. You did not even give them a chance. I let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. I said they had hours, they had 2 beds, they had a choice. They chose the floor for her, that was the chance. My wife's voice rose. Then she caught herself and lowered it again, breathing hard through her nose. She said, "You made them look like monsters, right after your father died. You brought that into this trip. You could not just let it go for one night." I felt my eyes burn. Not tears, heat. The kind that came when you were so tired you could not believe what you were hearing. I said, "My father died. That was exactly why I could not let it go. I was not going to come here to bury him and then teach my daughter she should accept being treated like she was less." My wife stared at me, and for a second I saw the fear under her anger. Fear that her daughters would pull away from her. Fear that this family would split into teams. Fear that she would lose control. But fear did not make her right. She said, "We will talk about this in the morning." I said, "No, we were talking about it now." My wife lay back down like she could end the conversation by closing her eyes. She said, "You already made your decision." I stood there in the dim light, listening to her breathing change, listening to the silence she used as a weapon. I realized I could not fix this with one good sentence. Not tonight. I turned away from the bed and sat on the edge of the other mattress, staring at the carpet, feeling like the whole hotel had become a pressure chamber. And in that moment, I understood something that scared me more than the fight itself. We were going to fly home, but this was not going to stay in that hallway. This was going to follow us into our house. When we got home, the trip ended, but the punishment started. It did not come as yelling or slammed doors. It came as quiet, the kind of quiet that made every room feel smaller. My stepdaughters moved through the house like I was furniture. If I said good morning, they did not answer. If I asked a simple question, they looked past me like I had spoken to the wall behind them. They did not argue. They did not explain. They just erased me. At first I told myself they were embarrassed. I told myself they would cool down, but the days went on and it stayed the same. They spoke to their mother in normal voices. They laughed with each other. They talked about school and friends. The silence only turned on when I entered the room. My daughter noticed it too. She tried not to. She kept her head down at dinner. She kept her voice small. I saw her watching their faces, waiting for some sign that she was forgiven for existing. The night in the hotel had not only hurt her, it had taught her that being protected came with a cost. My wife kept bringing it up, not in one big fight, but in little cuts that never healed. She brought it up when she looked at the credit card statement. She brought it up when we talked about bills. She brought it up when she was tired and did not want to deal with her daughters being upset. She said I had mishandled it. She said I had humiliated her girls. She said I had made them feel unsafe around me. That word unsafe made me stare at her. My daughter had been the one crying at 11 at night, and now I was the danger in the story. I reminded her of the floor. I reminded her of the blanket and the pillow on the carpet. I reminded her that they had 2 beds and had still decided my daughter belonged on the ground. My wife did not deny it happened. She only minimized it. She said it could have been one night. She said teenagers did stupid things. She said I should have forced them to share, not separated anyone. Every time she said it, I heard the same message under her words. My daughter should have endured it to keep the family calm. The worst part was how reasonable my wife sounded when she wanted to. She talked like she was being practical. Budget, stress, funeral, tension. One night, she said I had made a permanent problem out of a temporary issue. But I had watched my daughter's face in that room. I had seen the shame in her eyes when she said, "They said I should sleep there." I had heard her apologize to me after I told her to pack. I could not forget that. I could not unsee how quickly she assumed she deserved less. My stepdaughters never gave me a real explanation. Even at home, even with time to think, even with their mother backing them, they never said why they chose the floor for her. They only acted like I had attacked them for no reason. They acted like I had taken something from them. Sometimes I caught the 19-year-old looking at me with a hard face, like she was daring me to bring it up again. The 17-year-old copied her. If the older one refused to speak, the younger one refused too. It felt like a rule they followed to stay loyal to each other. And my wife supported that silence by treating it like my fault. She did not tell them to apologize. She did not tell them to explain themselves. She did not even tell them to acknowledge me. She only told me I should have been more careful. One evening my wife said it again while we were alone in the kitchen. She said, "You made it worse. You created sides." I stared at the counter, trying to keep my voice calm. I said, "There were sides the moment they put a blanket on the floor for her." My wife's eyes narrowed like I had insulted her personally. She said they were not trying to hurt her. They were just tired. They were stressed. You made them into villains. I felt that cold clarity again. It was not that she did not understand. It was that she did not want to. If she admitted it was cruelty, then she had to face what her daughters were capable of. She had to face what her plan had allowed. Upstairs, my daughter stayed in her room more than usual. She did not ask for anything. She did not complain. She did not bring up the hotel. That silence scared me more than the stepdaughter's anger. It felt like she was shrinking to fit into the space people gave her. One night I knocked on her door and asked if she was okay. She said yes too quickly. She said she was fine. Then she asked if I was mad at her. That question hit me like a slap. I told her no, of course not. But her eyes stayed uncertain, like she had learned that love could be withdrawn for causing trouble, even when the trouble was not hers. After that, I started doubting myself in small, poisonous ways, not about the floor, never about the floor, but about what came after, about the damage, about the cost, about the way my wife looked at me like I had broken something she could not fix. The house stayed quiet in the wrong places. The silence sat at the table with us. It followed me down the hall. It made me feel like I was the outsider in my own home. And in the middle of all of it, one question kept circling in my head, the same way it had circled in that hotel hallway. Did I protect my daughter, or did I just prove to everyone else that she would always come first, no matter what it did to the family? The more my wife and I argued about that hotel room, the more I realized we were not even fighting about a bed. She talked like the problem was comfort, like it was a normal travel annoyance. 3 teens, 2 beds, late night, everyone tired. In her version, my daughter could have slept on the floor one time and nothing important would have happened. In her version, the important thing was that no one felt singled out and no extra money got spent. But I could not stop seeing my daughter's face when I walked into that room. It was not the face of a kid who lost a coin flip for the better pillow. It was the face of a kid who understood she was the easiest person to push. That was what the floor really meant to me. It meant they did not see her as equal in that space. They saw her as the extra person, the one who should adjust, the one who should not complain, the one who should accept whatever was left. And the part that stayed stuck in my head was how unnecessary it was. There was space. There were 2 beds. One bed had bags on it, bags, not medical equipment, not something fragile, just luggage that could have been moved to the closet, the chair, the open floor, anywhere. They made room for objects and refused to make room for her. When I asked why, they did not give me a real answer. They did not say she had been cruel to them. They did not say she had done something unsafe. They did not even pretend there was a reason besides, we deserved it. That was the part my wife kept skipping past. I would say they had no reason and she would reply with money. I would say they chose the floor for her and she would reply with, it was one night. I would say she called me crying and she would reply with, you made it worse. Every time the conversation looped back, I felt like I was watching someone step over a line on purpose and then argue that the line was not real. I knew my wife was not blind. She was afraid. She was afraid that if she admitted her daughters had done something ugly, then she would have to deal with it. She would have to correct them. She would have to look them in the eye and say, you were wrong, and she would have to risk them turning on her. She was also afraid of what people thought of her girls. I heard it in the way she talked. She did not defend the floor itself. She defended their image. She did not ask why they did it. She asked why I reacted so strongly. It felt like she believed my daughter being hurt was less dangerous than her daughters being labeled as the bad ones. And I understood the fear underneath it. In blended families, everyone watched for proof that they mattered. Her girls watched for proof I would choose them. My daughter watched for proof she still had a safe place with me. My wife watched for proof the whole thing would not fall apart. But that fear did not change what happened. If I had told my daughter to sleep on the floor, I would have been setting a rule without saying it out loud. The rule would have been this: when someone needed to be uncomfortable so others could stay comfortable, it would be her. It would always be her. That kind of rule did not stay inside hotel walls. It followed you home. It shaped how people treated her at dinner, in the car, in the living room. It taught her what she could expect. It taught the other girls what they could get away with. That was why I could not let it be a small thing. My wife kept saying I created sides, but I believed the sides already existed. They were just quiet until that night forced them into the open. The stepdaughters refusing to answer me was not just stubbornness. It was them telling me I did not get to question them. It was them telling my daughter she did not deserve an explanation. And the silence afterward at home felt like the same message, just delivered in a different way. They did not shout. They did not apologize. They just removed me from their world until I felt punished enough to regret protecting her. That was why my daughter kept asking if I was mad at her. She felt the pressure too. She felt the cost of being defended. She felt like she had caused a problem just by needing basic respect. I did not want her to learn that lesson. I also did not want to destroy my marriage. I did not want to live in a house split into teams. I kept asking myself if there was a version of that night where I could have kept everyone calm and still protected her. But every time I replayed it, I came back to the same wall. They had no reason. They would not even pretend there was one. And when someone could not explain unfairness, the unfairness became the message. After weeks of going in circles, with my wife calling it favoritism and me calling it protection, I did something I never thought I would do. I decided to take it out of our house and into the court of public opinion, because at home, nobody agreed on what the floor really meant. I posted the story late at night, not because I wanted attention, but because I could not get my mind to stop looping. The house stayed tense. My daughter stayed quiet. My wife kept saying I went too far. My stepdaughters kept acting like I did not exist. I felt trapped in a fight where every person had a different version of what fairness meant. So I put it on the internet and waited for strangers to tell me what I could not settle inside my own home. The responses hit fast. They were not gentle. They did not care that my father had just died. They did not care that I was still sleeping badly and waking up with the funeral in my head. They only cared about the question: was I wrong for getting my daughter her own hotel room after her stepsisters tried to make her sleep on the floor? The first camp was loud and immediate: protect the minor. Those people did not even want extra context. They said the floor demand was unacceptable, full stop. They said a parent's job was to remove a child from harm, even if the harm was not physical. They said it was not about comfort. It was about dignity. They called the separate room a boundary. They wrote that I did the only thing that worked in that moment because arguing with two older teens at night was pointless. Some of them went further than I expected. They said my stepdaughters were acting like bullies. They said my wife was enabling it by focusing on money and peace instead of what happened. A few said the most alarming part was that my daughter apologized, like she had done something wrong by needing a bed. Reading that made my throat tighten, because it matched the fear I could not name at home. The second camp sounded just as certain, but in the opposite direction. Favoritism alarm. They said I was wrong, and not because the floor was okay, but because of how I handled it. They said booking a separate room singled my daughter out as the special one. They said if I was going to spend money, I should have spent it in a way that treated all three girls the same. They suggested I should have gotten a bigger room, or 2 rooms for the girls, or a suite, or something that made the solution look neutral. Some of them said I should have forced one rule on the spot: share the bed, move the bags, everyone sleeps like equals, end of story. They argued that by removing my daughter, I rewarded the conflict and made it worse long term. They warned that my stepdaughters would always remember that I pulled my daughter out and left them behind. They called it a message, even if I did not mean it that way. I wanted to dismiss that camp, but I could not, because my wife had said the same thing, just with softer words. Reading strangers echo her made my stomach turn. It meant this was not only my wife being defensive. It meant my choice really did look like favoritism to some people, even if my intent was protection. The third camp came in colder and more tired. Everyone failed the moment. They said the stepdaughters acted unfairly, but the adults failed to manage it before it reached a crisis. They said my wife minimized the problem, which taught the girls that disrespect was not a big deal. They said I reacted correctly to protect my daughter, but I missed a chance to enforce a fair standard inside the shared room before leaving it. These people listed options like they were drawing diagrams. They said I could have made the stepdaughters move the luggage. I could have told them the bed was shared by 3, no arguing, lights out. I could have offered a rotation. I could have brought in extra blankets or asked the desk for a cot. They kept repeating that blended families needed clear rules, or the loudest kids would make the rules for everyone. The fourth camp was less emotional and more practical. Logistics first. They asked questions like an investigator. Was the room two queens or one queen and a pullout? Why did nobody call the front desk for a rollaway? Did the hotel even allow extra cots? Why did the adults not swap rooms so the girls could have the larger setup? Why did my wife book this arrangement in the first place? Why did the stepdaughters refuse to explain their demand? They were the ones who made me realize how strange that refusal was. If there had been any real reason, even a petty one, they could have said it. But they did not. They stonewalled me. Those commenters kept circling that point like it mattered more than the money. After those four groups, the thread split again, into places that felt darker than a hotel argument. A fifth camp focused almost entirely on my wife. They said the real conflict was not between teens. It was between me and the adult who should have been my partner. They said my wife chose her daughter's comfort over my daughter's dignity, and then punished me when I refused to accept it. They called it a loyalty test. They said her reaction told me how future conflicts would go, and that I should pay attention now before my daughter learned she was always outnumbered. That camp made me feel defensive at first. I did not want my wife painted as a villain. I knew she was stressed. I knew she was trying to keep the trip from exploding. But when I reread the moment in my head, I could not ignore it. The first thing she asked was about cost, not about my daughter crying. Then there was a sixth camp that did not care about who was right. They cared about what came next. They warned that silent treatment was a form of control. They said my stepdaughter's cutting me off was not a normal cooldown. They said it was a punishment strategy. They told me to set boundaries in my own home, to demand basic respect, and to protect my daughter from being isolated. Some of them suggested family therapy. Some suggested a serious talk with my wife without the girls present. A few went straight to the extreme and said divorce, because they believed my daughter would pay for every compromise I made. I hated reading that. It felt like strangers were pushing their own scars onto my life. But I also could not pretend the idea did not scare me, because I had already felt the house dividing into teams. As I kept scrolling, I noticed something odd. Even the people who thought I handled it wrong still called the floor demand disrespectful. They argued about the solution, but most did not defend the act itself. Almost everyone agreed that telling one teen to sleep on the carpet while the others took the bed sent a message. Online, the same action got called protection or favoritism, depending on who read it. And the comments did not fix my life, but they did something else. They pushed past the hotel and started asking a question I had tried not to say out loud. If my daughter could be put on the floor so easily, and if my wife could excuse it so quickly, then what kind of family had we been building all this time? After the first wave of comments, I thought the internet would settle into one clear answer. Instead, it split again, and the new groups did not argue about beds or hotel policies. They argued about me as a person, my wife as a person, and what grief did to both of us. Camp 5 was the one that kept bringing up my father. These people read the same facts and said the context mattered. They said I had been operating on low sleep, high stress, and raw emotion. They said grief made patience thin, and thin patience made decisions look harsher than they were. A few of them said that was exactly why my wife should have backed me in the moment, even if she disagreed later. They said funerals were not the time to test loyalties inside a blended family. Some of them surprised me. They did not excuse my wife, but they understood her panic too. They said she probably felt trapped between her daughters and her husband while standing in the shadow of a death. They said she might have reached for money and calm because she did not know how to handle something more painful, like admitting her daughters could treat someone badly. They called it stress math. In a crisis, people counted what they could measure like dollars, because feelings did not have clear numbers. But even in that camp, almost everyone circled back to one hard point. Grief was not an excuse to demand a child's sleep on the floor. Grief explained why I moved fast. It did not justify what the girls did. Camp 6 focused on the step-sibling dynamic, and it hit a nerve I had been trying to ignore. Those commenters barely cared about the hotel layout. They cared about the 2 versus 1. They said it was a classic power move. 2 older girls in a room with 1 younger girl who was not fully theirs. 2 voices against 1. 2 people deciding what was normal. They wrote that the lack of a reason was the reason. They said if my stepdaughters had a real issue with my daughter, they would have said it. They would have complained about behavior or attitude. They would have demanded an apology. Instead, they refused to explain because explaining would have made it a debate. And they did not want a debate. They wanted obedience. That camp kept repeating the same idea in different words. Exclusion did not always look like screaming. Sometimes it looked like a blanket on the carpet and a calm voice saying, "This is where you belong." They said my daughter calling me at 11 meant she already knew she could not win the argument inside that room. She did not call to negotiate. She called to escape. A few people in that camp asked questions that made me sit back from my phone. They asked if this had happened before in smaller ways, if my daughter got cut out of conversations, if plans got made without her, if she always ended up taking the smaller share to keep things quiet. They said the hotel night was not the start. It was just the first time it became impossible to deny. I wanted to say no right away, but my mind went to all the moments I did not notice because nobody cried. I thought about how often my daughter stayed in her room while the other girls watched something together. How often she tried to be easy. How often she apologized. Camp 6 did not tell me I was a hero. They told me I had been late. They said I had finally drawn a line, and I should not pretend the line could be temporary. They said boundaries only worked if they stayed in place after the crisis ended. Otherwise, the stronger group learned they only needed to wait me out. Then Camp 7 showed up, and it was the most uncomfortable one to read, because it aimed directly at my marriage. These commenters did not argue about who had the better moral instincts. They argued about systems. They said my wife and I had no shared plan for what fairness meant. They said we were arguing about money because money was safer than admitting the real issue, which was authority and loyalty. They wrote that if 2 adults did not agree on rules, the teenagers would write the rules themselves in real time in the dark when nobody was watching. One line from that camp stuck in my head. If you did not set rules early, teenagers would set them for you. They said the hotel night showed exactly that. My wife assumed the girls would share. I assumed basic decency would cover the rest. Meanwhile, my stepdaughters tested the boundary and found it soft. The only reason they hit a hard wall was because my daughter finally called me. Camp 7 told me to stop arguing with my wife about the room cost and start talking about standards. They said to agree on a simple rule that applied everywhere. Nobody slept on the floor while others had a bed. Nobody stored luggage on a bed while a person went without. No silent treatment in the house. No ignoring an adult. No punishing someone for asking for help. They warned that if we did not handle the silent treatment, it would become normal. They called it a training tool. They said teenagers learned quickly what behavior controlled the adults. If my stepdaughters learned that shutting me out made their mother defend them harder and made me hesitate, then silence would become their weapon every time they wanted power. Some commenters in that camp also said something I did not want to admit. They said my wife might not have realized she was taking a side, but she was. By telling me my daughter could have slept on the floor, she set the lowest acceptable standard, and my daughter was the one expected to meet it. They said that was not unity. That was hierarchy. I kept scrolling until my eyes blurred and the comments started to feel like voices in a courtroom. Some called me right. Some called me wrong. Some called everyone wrong. But the longer I read, the more I understood why I could not get relief at home. We were trapped between 2 values that both sounded good. Fairness sounded good. Equal treatment, no special favors, no obvious winners. My wife held that word like a shield because she believed it kept peace. Protection sounded good too. A parent stepping in when a child was being pushed down. I held that word like a weapon because I believed it kept my daughter safe. And the problem was we had no agreement on what happened when those values crashed into each other at midnight in a hotel. Online, people could pick a side and move on. They could type a judgment and close the app. But I still lived in the house where the silence sat at the table, and my daughter still watched faces like she was counting risks. I stared at my phone in the dark and realized the comments had shifted the question. It was not only, was I wrong that night? It was what happened next. Even if I had made the right choice at the hotel, did we talk like a family and set rules that protected everyone? Or did we split into permanent sides and call it normal? The trip ended, but the real work stayed at home. When I looked back on that night, I did not regret protecting my daughter. I regretted how fast my grief turned into sharp words. I regretted how I sounded when I told my wife I would rather be called unfair than let my kids sleep on the floor. I knew my tone had made my wife defensive. It gave her a way to focus on my delivery instead of the problem. But the facts stayed the same, no matter how gently I said them. We had 2 hotel rooms. One room was for me and my wife. One room was for 3 girls, my 16-year-old and my 2 stepdaughters who were 19 and 17. In that girl's room there were 2 beds. Instead of sharing, my stepdaughters insisted my daughter sleep on the floor. When she called me around 11 at night, she was crying. When I went to the room and asked why, they did not give a clear reason. They did not say there was a conflict that needed fixing. They did not say there was a safety issue. They just stood there like the floor was normal. So I made a decision. I told my daughter to grab her things, and I booked her a separate room. That was the moment my wife called favoritism. She said I wasted money. She said my daughter could have endured one night on the floor. She said I escalated things and embarrassed her girls. I said the floor was not a small discomfort. I said it was a message, and it was a message I refused to accept. When we came home, the argument did not fade. It hardened. My stepdaughters stopped speaking to me. It was not loud. It was steady. They walked past me without a word. They spoke normally to their mother and only went silent with me. My wife kept bringing the hotel up like a debt I had created. She kept saying I mishandled it, even while she admitted she never planned for anyone to sleep on the floor. My daughter stayed quiet in her own way, like she was afraid that needing help had cost too much. That was what scared me the most. Not the money, not the online opinions. The way my daughter asked if I was mad at her. The way she shrank to fit the space she thought she was allowed to take. I understood something painful about my wife too. I did not think she wanted my daughter on the floor. I thought she wanted the appearance of unity more than she wanted to face a hard truth about her own kids. I thought she feared losing their trust, and that fear made her defend them even when they were wrong. In a blended family, fear moved like electricity. My wife feared her daughters would see her as weak if she corrected them. My stepdaughters feared losing status in the house. My daughter feared being unwanted. And I feared teaching my daughter that love meant tolerating humiliation to keep the peace. The internet gave me many answers, but it did not give me a plan. At home, we still did not have one. Because the real problem was never a mattress. It was respect. It was what happened when someone tried to push a line and the adults did not respond the same way. One adult tried to keep harmony by minimizing. The other adult tried to protect by acting fast. The kids learned that the adults could be divided, and silence became the weapon that kept the division alive. If I could redo that night with a calmer voice, I would have. I would have said less and listened more. I would have asked my daughter if she felt safe in that room before I did anything else. I would have told my stepdaughters clearly that refusing to share space with a person was not acceptable, and that I expected an explanation and an apology. But I still would not have left her on the floor. And that left me with the question I could not answer alone. What should happen after the hotel, when everyone was back under one roof and the consequences were no longer temporary? Should I have swapped rooms and put the girls in the adult room so nobody could claim special treatment? Should I have enforced bed sharing and made all three follow one rule, even if it meant a fight at midnight? Or was the separate room the right boundary, because it removed my daughter from a situation where she was outnumbered and being pressured to accept less? If you were me, what rule would you set for any future trip so this could not happen again? Would you make a no-floor rule? Would you ban luggage on beds? Would you demand rotating sleeping spots? Would you say that silent treatment in the house counted as disrespect and had consequences? Tell me what you would have done next, and what you would do if you were trying to keep the family together without sacrificing the child who got pushed aside. Because if something like this happened again, the real question was not who got the bed. The real question was whether we would act like one team, or whether the kids would learn they could divide us whenever they wanted.